Hello, everyone. Welcome to class and good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. This is Dr. Dax, and we are now in week 10. We see the light at the end of the tunnel. Everyone's doing quite well on their progress. You should be looking at deliverable 6 by now, at least. And if not, let me know what's going on, and hopefully we can help you figure out how to get back on track. But I think everybody is pretty much exactly on target. So we are at a point now where you're looking at the final information to start building your last deliverable or maybe a couple of deliverables. And basically, they involve comprehensive skills that we've been talking about accumulatively all along. And so at this point in the game, sometimes what I like to do is do a little bit of a soft skills training. And that means that we're going to pull some skills in that are outside of your ebook and your regular training and just stuff that kind of augments you in your career in IT project management or whatever it is that you do. So those skills can vary depending on what kind of time we got left. But I think that it would be helpful for people in any form of management, or even if you're not in management, to take advantage of today's content. Today is all about conflict resolution. So whether you're in a professional capacity as a manager or a team member or an employee that's hourly, whatever the case may be, conflict resolution can help you professionally, can help you personally. And so without further ado, I want to go ahead and get that information opened up and we will dig in. I hope that you've all had a great weekend and that you're in the part of the country that's not being ravaged by tornadoes and stuff. I got family in the Mid South and they were lucky, but some people near their communities were not. Hope that you guys are doing okay with all of that. And I'm going to go ahead and get the slideshow going. All right, you should see it, hopefully. And okay, so today, conflict resolution and the associated skill negotiation. There's a lot to say about it, a lot to chew on, so I'm going to get through as much of it as I can. Once I'm done, I will also be uploading the materials that I'm teaching from, so you'll have all of it to look at and maybe employ in your own circle. So, our objectives for today are we're going to be hopefully understanding and appreciating conflict, believe it or not. We'll be eliminating and avoiding unnecessary conflict, although I'll point out that conflict is actually necessary, but we'll get to that. I don't want to put the cart before the horse. We'll talk about reducing the negative effects of conflict, managing conflicts for positive results for the individual, the team, and the organization. And so, my goal for you is to understand and appreciate conflict. So let's make some assumptions right off the bat. First of all, I want to stress that conflict is universal. No matter what company you're working at, what organization you are in, conflict is universal, and uh, it permeates everything that we do. Why? Because we don't all think alike. Conflict is inevitable. Anytime two people agree on absolutely everything, there's one too many people in that relationship. And so conflict is born out of the idea that we all interpret things and we translate things in our mind differently. And that can be a good thing. We can leverage that skill. Conflict, I would argue, is not only inevitable, it is normal in our life. It is essential. Conflict can't be totally eliminated. We want to eliminate partially, but we want to deal with the important stuff. All conflicts can be managed or resolved. Unresolved conflicts do not go away and disappear by themselves. So let's talk about what that means. Conflict refers to a process in which one party, which can be a person or a group of persons, perceives that its interests are being opposed or negatively affected by another party. Conflict is often associated with situations that involve contradictory or irreconcilable interest between two opposing groups or individuals. Conflict is an expression of hostility, negative attitude, rivalry, disagreement, incompatibility, incongruence, and so on. It's often associated with a negative thing that we want to avoid conflict. It is typically manifested in a flight, a collusion, a struggle, contest, opposition, mental strife, and so on. It is also manifested if it escalates into shouting, insulting, cursing, humiliating comments, making accusations, sulking, shedding tears, withdrawal, in some situations, physical violence, avoidance, payback, backstabbing. And so it's a very negative aspect of human nature, but it is part of human nature. So what we do is we try to manage the conflict. We try to do it in a responsible and logical way. So conflict management consists of diagnostic processes, interpersonal styles, negotiation strategies, and other interventions that are designed to avoid unnecessary conflict and reduce or resolve excessive conflict. Notice that I said avoid unnecessary conflict because not all conflict is necessary. We don't want to avoid all conflict. Sometimes we need to face it. We need to resolve it and find something that's mutually beneficial. The ability to understand and correctly diagnose conflict is essential to managing it. Poorly handled conflict takes away your energy, just sucks the life right out of you. You ever been involved in a situation where nothing you could say was right and everything you did just saps your energy and it interferes with interpersonal relationships, both personal and professional, and it prevents everyone from reaching their goals. On the other hand, properly handled conflict can be a really good thing. If it's handled properly, conflict can yield positive outcomes. As M. Kennedy wrote in 1998, when managed correctly, conflict produces the following results: new ideas for changing organizational processes, solving for continuous problems, and a chance for workers to expand their capabilities, and an introduction of creativity into thoughts about organizational problems. Conflict is inescapable, as I said before. You will come across it. If you haven't yet, uh, welcome to Earth. You're going to have it. It's inescapable and interdependent relationships where the action of one party has consequences for the other and vice versa. Conflict grows out of a similarity in the needs and benefits of the parties when using scarce and indivisible resources. Satisfaction of needs is simultaneous. Remember, we talked about earlier in this term that resources are finite. Everyone needs them, though. So, what do you do? Contrarily, conflict also has its roots in different needs and values of the interdependent people. What do we do? And how do we do it? So, conflicts get reflected in our working life or behavior patterns as they impact us in different ways. They can be summarized as fight behavior, flight behavior, and flow behavior. Now, in fight behavior, the one that we most often associate with conflict, involves aggressiveness. It involves a win-lose situation. And it's unkind to the people because in this mentality, in every conflict, there's a winner and a loser. Someone always gets what they want and someone always does not. It is effective with problems. The flight approach to conflict is more passive. It's a lose-win, lose-lose situation. And it's often kind to the people because it involves a great deal of avoidance. It's kind of like, I don't care what's right, I just want peace and quiet. It's ineffective with the problem. It will not face any kind of resolution. The third approach to conflict, generally speaking, is flow. Now, what I mean by that is the behavior is characterized as assertive. It takes a proactive stance in recognizing conflict for what it is and attempting to find resolution. It is a win-win situation. It's not a winner and loser situation. It involves fluidity, flexibility, elegance, grace. It is sure-footed and stays calm, explores alternatives, and goes on for fair ones. And I would categorize it as being kind with people. It is effective with the problem. There are different views over the role of conflict. The traditional view is that conflicts are considered bad and required to be avoided at all costs. Conflict has been associated with fighting, and fighting involves people getting hurt, uh, not necessarily physically, but in other ways as well. The human relation view of conflict is that conflicts are bound to be there, and management should always be concerned with trying to avoid conflicts and keeping peace in the organization. The interactionist view, or the more modern view, is that leaders should allow some conflicts to happen in the group so that the group always remains viable, self critical, and hopefully creative. There are different approaches. There are functional and dysfunctional conflicts. What I would call positive conflicts are functional conflicts. They actually resolve and promote some good for the organization, for the group, for the individuals involved. They support the goals and improves the performance, whereas dysfunctional conflict hinders group performance, much like my cat is hindering my performance right now. Get down, cat. Functional conflict serves the following functions: analytical thinking, group cohesiveness, competition, new ideas, challenges, creativity, stimulation for change, identification of weaknesses, awareness, quality decisions, release of tension. But dysfunctional negative conflicts involve a hindrance to group performance. It results in high employee turnover, high tension, dissatisfaction, climate of distress, confrontation. This type of conflict always results in change, sometimes by design, sometimes out of unforeseen conditions. I once worked in a department where there were some interpersonal problems, there were performance issues, and rather than dealing with training and trying to resolve issues, management brought in a middle manager whose job was to clean the house. And he came in guns blazing, and his form of conflict resolution was highly dysfunctional. But that was his function. He came in, like I said, guns blazing, firing people left and right, and he cleaned house. He ran pretty much everyone off that was uh, good for the group, as well as those that were not good for the group. And so there was a high level of tension, high level of confrontation. That was just his management style. Um, Hopefully, since then, he's grown some, but we'll see. Anyway, according to research, the hidden financial cost of an organization is afflicted by conflict. It is estimated that over 65% of performance problems result from strained relationships between employees, not from actual defects in employee skill or motivation. And we're going to talk about how to deal with that. Let's talk about, first of all, consequences. Every conflict involves consequences. Some are good and some are negative. Now, positive consequences of conflict can be new ideas. If people can resolve a conflict by having an open mind and listening to others, they can actually put their thoughts together and form something new. It stimulates creativity if you allow it to. It motivates change and promotes organizational vitality, helps individuals and groups establish their identities, and serves as a safety valve to indicate problems. If you avoid conflict, you might also be avoiding the identification of problems. So you must be open to new ideas. Negative results of conflict, if handled incorrectly, it diverts energy away from work. It threatens the psychological well being of everybody involved, wastes resources, creates a negative climate, and breaks down group cohesion. And it can increase the hostility and aggressive behaviors. And the thing about that is, it always escalates. If person A attacks person B, human nature is not to meet that force with equal force. It's to step it up a little bit. And that other person feels threatened, they step it up, and on we go. And that's a negative approach to conflict. You can shut it down in an effective way that actually helps the company. So, how do we know the difference? Well, The demarcation between the functional and dysfunctional conflict is not clear, it's not precise, there's no exact science to it. The criterion that differentiates the dysfunctional conflict is group performance. In other words, since groups exist to attain goals, it is the impact of the conflict on the group rather than any individual member that determines the functionality. The manager has to look at the issue, the context, and the parties involved. The following questions can be used to diagnose the specific nature of the conflict a manager may face. For one thing, are the parties approaching the conflict from a hostile standpoint or from a standpoint of, we want to do this better? Is the outcome likely to be negative for the organization? And do potential losses of the parties exceed any potential gains? Is energy being diverted from goal accomplishment? So if the majority of these answers are yes, then the conflict is most likely dysfunction. Once the manager has diagnosed the type of conflict, he or she can either work to resolve it or to stimulate it. Interpersonal conflict may either be productive or destructive, depending on the skills the participants have at managing it. So let's talk about the types of conflict that you can encounter. There are a number of classification schemes for the various types of conflicts. One that we have already mentioned is functional and dysfunctional. There are also realistic versus non-realistic conflicts. Realistic conflicts have rational, task, or goal-oriented confrontations, whereas non-realistic confrontations are in no way related to the goals or tasks of the group and organization. It consists of projected frustrations and emotions. For example, let's say I have a problem or frustration at home, and I decide to take it to the group and project it there. That is non-realistic and toxic. Then there's substantive versus affective conflicts. So Guetzko and Gear have proposed this classification. According to them, substantive conflicts are task-related conflicts, whereas affective conflicts are related to socio-emotional or interpersonal relations issues. Are they always black and white? Maybe they're muddled. It depends on the situation. Conflicts of both kinds can occur over various types of issues. Morton and Deutsch suggested 5 such issues. We're going to cover them now. Resources, the control of money, resources, space, tools, vehicles, company equipment, any kind of power. Preferences and nuisances, value, belief systems, and the nature of relationships between parties. Deutsch also proposed 6 types of conflict which may occur across the issues at any time and in any combination. There's veridical conflict. This type of conflict exists objectively and is perceived accurately. It's honest, but a difficult difference of opinion. Then there's contingent conflict. This is resolvable, but parties are not usually aware of it. A larger perspective can help this situation. There's displaced conflict, where the parties fail to identify the real issue and argue over secondary issues. Misattributed conflict. This is the assigning of the wrong reasons, often unconsciously, to the conflict. Latent conflict, which is a failure to consciously recognize that a true conflict exists. And false conflict, a conflict without a bias caused by misunderstanding and poor communication. Robbins proposed 3-fold classifications of conflict. There's task conflict, which relates to the content and the goal of the work. Relationship conflict, which is dealing with interpersonal and emotional issues. And process conflict. It focuses on how the work gets done. Robbins suggests low to moderate amount of task and process conflict is helpful for performance, and I would agree. However, relationship conflict invariably hinders group performance. Conflicts on the basis of the existence of various units can be classified in terms of interorganizational, intergroup, and interpersonal conflicts. The prefix inter is used for depicting conflict between units or parties, whereas the prefix intra is used to refer to conflict within a unit or party. Interorganizational conflicts are conflicts that can arise between two or more organizations. There are numerous examples of interorganizational conflicts. Now, healthy competition is not necessarily the same thing as conflict. They can be functional as well as dysfunctional conflicts. Some organizations, due to competition, enhance their quality, and same can be treated as a functional conflict. However, the same organizations are engaged in malicious campaign against each other, then conflict will be termed as dysfunctional. Now, an intergroup conflict, as the name implies, occurs between two or more groups, departments, or teams, and deals with intergroup battles. When there is intergroup conflict, the groups become more cohesive, task focused, and members tend to show greater loyalty. However, the outgroup, the other group, is seen as the enemy, and hostility and obstructing behavior among the members will negatively affect the interest of the other group. If these groups are within the same organization, that can have an overall negative effect on the company's performance. It is therefore suggested that competition must be managed carefully, and competing groups should not lose sight of superordinate goals of the organization. And interpersonal conflict, probably the most common type. It's conflict between two or more individuals, and it would be considered as interpersonal. Such conflicts can occur due to individual differences, including differences in the perception of problems, perception of the situations, attitudes, and values, apart from differences arising out of control and allocation of resources. And this is the one that we see all the time. Intrapersonal conflict is conflict occurs within a person. So there are several types of intrapersonal conflict: inter-role conflict, person-role conflicts. The role is a set of expectations established by someone else, and the individual doesn't necessarily agree. Persons who are putting their own expectations are called the senders, and the person who's receiving the set of expectation is the focus of attention. They're called the focal person. Much like my cat is trying to become the focus now. Okay. The inter-role conflict can occur when a person is experiencing conflict due to competing demands in tow roles. An employee may be a union leader and also an executive in production of something. A person's role as an executive expects him to be obedient to his boss and work diligently within the organization. However, the role as a union can create a problem. By playing both roles, the person experiences an inter-role conflict. Now, I want to pause here and say that this doesn't happen a lot because the nature of unions is established such that individuals involved in union leadership can't be managers, at least in the industry where I work. Hourly employees uh, can be in the union and they're represented by a contract, but managers have their own individual contracts with the company, and so they can't have union representation. Now, there are people who work in a leadership role that aren't necessarily quote unquote managers that are also in the union, and that's fine as long as your interests don't conflate. Now, person role conflict occurs when a person is expected to do a certain thing as part of his role, which is against his own personal value system. Let's say, for example, a person strongly feels uh, that environment uh, issues are of great concern. She's asked to defend an act of unguarded pollution for her company to the government officials, and that expectation puts her in a person role conflict. Some sources of conflict include uh, many things. For example, personal or organizational sources are role, goal, resource, and structural sources. Parikh has proposed 7 main sources of interpersonal and intergroup conflict. In a moment, I'll show you a table that represents how various parties perceive sources of conflict under escalation and resolution mode. The sources can include a selfish concern, which can generate a narrow short-term orientation. Parties are interested only in their own self-interests. This approach actually does not help the individual, as the organizational group is likely to remain unless the parties to the conflict broaden their perspective and attain what Sheriff called a superordinate goals, but cannot be attained by any one member or party alone. Superordinate goals are those that are necessary for all members of the group. And superordinate goals cannot be attained by any one individual. It can only be attained by collective efforts of all members. And some potential sources of conflict and perception are in here, 2 different modes. And we'll show you here, you got sources of potential conflict, perception under conflict escalation, and result orientation, perception under conflict prevention and resolution mode, and the resultant orientation. Common sources include misunderstanding and miscommunication. This is listed as number 1 for a reason. It is the highest, most common source of conflict. Second, dishonesty. Third, negligence. Fourth is intention. And 5, exclusive investment in one's own opinions and belief system. Failure to establish boundaries, the mishandling of conflict, fear, and hidden agendas. Now, hidden agenda sounds kind of sinister, but the real meaning behind that is not like it sounds. Hidden agenda just means that one person has one view of how something should be handled, and which is in conflict with the other person's expectations of the outcome. I can give you a personal example. Uh, I am married to a person who already had children from a previous marriage, as did I. We're a step family. When we first got together, we'd go out to dinner, and in one particular situation, the youngest, who at the time was like 4, crawled out of his seat and came up on me and it was my stepson. He was climbing up on me on the side and stuff. And I kept looking at his mother because we just got married and he was used to dealing with her. And I kept looking at her with the expectation, like, are you going to handle this? He's like climbing it like I'm the Sears Tower and he's King Kong. And I kept putting him down. He kept climbing up on me. And I couldn't finish my meal. I was getting frustrated. And everyone was laughing and she was having a good time. He was having a good time. And I was a little confused here because my expectation was she was going to handle the situation by getting him, making him get down, spanking him if necessary. She thought that I was going to paddle him or, be authoritarian. And the thing is, in marriage, in a step marriage, especially, uh, discipline from the step parent comes eventually, but it shouldn't come immediately. And we can have a whole talk about that, but that's not related to this discussion here. But that is a hidden agenda. My hidden agenda was that she would handle it. Her hidden agenda was that I'm the dad now, so I can handle it, and that was a source of conflict. And we, of course, we resolved it, uh, and that was 20 years ago. So I'd say we're still successful, but that's just I just want to clear that up. Hidden agenda sounds like some kind of spy material or something. All right, so the conflict continuum is at each end of the continuum is an extreme. You got peace on one end, at the other end of the spectrum is war. And a state of peace is a state of compassion. A state of war is a state of ultimate conflict, the most negative extreme, to which there is physical hostility leading to death. Wars can take place between countries, tribes, drug kings, gangs, corporations, partners, and yes, individuals. And right now in this country, we're very well aware of a war situation going on in Ukraine, and we all hope and pray that that situation is resolved quickly for those people. So let's chart out the spectrum here between war and peace. So I want to point out the different associations with the line from peace. There's love, personal, situation, cooperation, friendship, openness, situational cooperation. In the middle is neutrality. And as clashes increase and hostility increases, it leads to war, both figuratively and in a very real sense, literally. So, how do we avoid conflict? Well, we've talked about different methods, but the biggest thing that I think we can point to is look at the biggest source of conflict that we talked about. We discussed the number one source being miscommunication, misunderstanding. So, what I want to propose is the answer to that is um, clear communication, transparency. Now, we've talked all along about establishing our documentation with the project management and communicating consistently and clearly and honestly. That extends to verbal communication, written communication, and you can preempt a lot of conflict by simply sticking to that. I can give you an example from my job. Now, prior to about a year and a half ago, I was a union steward. I was a shop steward. And my job was to, a lot of times, oversee conflict. And the way that a lot of conflicts arise that I could see happened because of generalities. I had a situation where one individual was angry with another individual, and the statement was, well, this always happens, or this never happens. Whenever terms always and never, terms of absolutes, are used, you need to get to the bottom of it. You need to dig a little deeper. As a manager, you're going to come into situations where you need to resolve conflict. And the way we do that is we get to the specifics. Now, when we dug and dug, we got to a place where one accused the other specifically of not doing a specific work order, when in fact it had been done. It was just closed out under a different job code. And beyond that, there were no specifics. But that was from something that was weeks and weeks before the conflict. It just had built and built and festered to a point where we had to face it. Um, that can handle 80% of the interoffice conflicts, I promise you, if you can just get specific. If a manager or a team member points fingers and says, well, this always happens, this never happens, don't deal with generalities, deal with specifics. I'm a person of logic anyway. I don't I don't defend or attack based on generalities. I try to get to the heart of what specifically are we talking about. That can help you remove so much of the conflict. Now, conflict in itself is a good thing. A little bit of stress is a good thing. Psychologists will tell you, anyone that deals with human nature will tell you, uh, a little bit of conflict is absolutely essential for growth. And it helps you to see um, another person's perspective if you keep an open mind and you're willing to listen. Okay. So, whatever phase you're in of your career, if you're in middle management, or if you're an hourly employee, or you're entry level, if you're not an employee at all, you're just a student and you're hoping to enter the workforce, or maybe you are a manager, it all benefits. All stages can benefit from solid communication and conflict resolution. And I hope that this talk has been helpful. There's a lot more to unpack, but I'm going to let you have the rest of your day now, and I will upload the lecture notes. You can continue reading if you wish. And if you have any questions or you want to discuss this further, shoot me a message, dax.bradley@rasmussen.edu, and let me know. And if nothing else, I will see you guys again on Thursday. So take care and have a great rest of the week. We'll talk then. Dr. Dax out.